Oh, you go. Okay. So welcome back. It's great to have you here. We have quite a full, very interesting afternoon. 2 working sessions. We have the next one, the second one, that will take us to coffee break, and then after the coffee break, we have the final working session for the day. Now, this specific session is now bringing us the perspective of the airlines. It's the Airline Leaders Symposium. We had before lunch the Airport Leaders Symposium. And this session will be chaired by Kata Cherep, who is really an expert on the subject, given that she's Vice President and leader of ICF EMEA Aviation Practice, and she has over her past experience be focusing both on commercial airports and airlines. I could stir a little bit the trouble, just to be provocative, to just say that the airports before actually said that you're 95% of the problem. So maybe you want to pick up that glove, Kata. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. I think I've got many potentially controversial subjects to pick up, but I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you for the introduction. I've got just a few minutes to set the scene, and then we'll go straight into the panel discussion. Olivier already very eloquently and quite comprehensively outlined the state of the industry, but I also just wanted to share one slide about how I think the challenges fit together that will inform how our airline panelists are thinking about the market. We have aviation demand, the foundation for the airport business that all of us serve in some way or another. This covers everything from income levels to customer expectations, important corporate travel, customer loyalty, and so on. Generally speaking, this segment remains robust and over the long term is expected to grow, but we are hearing both short-term and long-term headwinds that may impact how we each operate. Then, on the supply side, we have issues of airspace, airport capacity, aircraft, who actually facilitate all of this flying that we do, different airline business models. As you might expect, that's where a lot of our discussion today is going to focus. The demand and supply, and crucially, let's not forget everything else, Brexit we've touched on, but also including things like cybersecurity. So we clearly won't cover everything in this session, but I think by the end you'll find that we've touched on many of them. Thinking ahead to this conference and the theme about the sustainability challenge, I thought about how I might approach it. In the earlier session, we already heard about the food industry and how aligned they are in their messaging and how that's been quite successful. I went a slightly different route. And this is how I was thinking about the sustainability challenge. This will be lost on many of you, I realize, and some of you will be thinking, oh God, please don't tell me what in the previous session, and the importance, really common enemy might be, the value in collaborating and coming to a team effort, whether that's a communication response, as we saw before, or a different kind of response, a much more radical one, as in the case of the Game of Thrones, might be something for us to draw across to the aviation sector. But it's already been touched on, and the challenge is there, that it's all about the airlines. How bad should the aviation industry feel about the environmental impact? Actually, the progress over the last 15 years on a per passenger kilometre basis has been truly impressive. 40% declines, attributable largely to very significant load factor increases. Many of our airlines here have contributed to that. And of course, newer, more efficient aircraft, which also the airlines have invested very heavily in. So what's the problem? The trend is going downwards. This has exceeded the 1.5% per year commitment that the industry has signed up to in 2008 through ATAC. Well, the problem's this. Over the same period, global RPKs have grown by 145%. And the growth is expected to continue. We all wish it to continue. So there's a disconnect. But the industry certainly hasn't been idle. There are 2 emerging groups of technologies emerging. One I've called sustainable fuels, one I've called electric propulsion, and there are numerous different avenues already being invested in, including by some of my panelists and those of you in the room. It's quite striking just how many different options there are within each, and also interesting that many of the investors and the players are backing more than one of these options because they're in their infancy. They are risky investments. It's not clear at this stage which of them are going to pay off. But both airlines and airports are investing in biofuels, have been for some time, not just in Europe. There are significant projects underway in North America, in Australia, and of course all across Europe as well, on the airline side at the top and the airport side at the bottom. And we also have numerous investments underway in new aircraft technologies. The Paris Air Show last week, many new technologies being unveiled, some of them with the potential to start flying some passengers, particularly on shorter sectors, within the next 5 to 10 years, certainly. There is, of course, the challenge of what happens with long haul. Most people agree that electric propulsion will not be able to serve that market, so other measures are needed. This is where CORSIA, which many of you will be aware of, this is the carbon offsetting scheme. Currently in the monitoring phase, CORSIA is intended to offset what cannot be avoided. We are currently in the preparation phase. It will start with a voluntary phase. Already 81 countries have signed up. This is a carbon offsetting scheme. The second phase will be mandatory, covering international flights with a few carve-outs for very small island nations, very underdeveloped nations, and so on. Lenses that I look at this through. I need to answer, how can I fly, but still feel good about being carbon neutral or even carbon positive? Is that possible? For brands, which are the airlines as well as the airports and other stakeholders, how can sustainability investments drive preference for customers, colleagues, citizens and neighbours, and operational efficiency cost savings? Ideally, both. And for governments and policymakers, how can aviation continue to drive economic growth and innovation while being in line with sustainability commitments? My panelists will be relieved to know that they will not have to answer all of these questions right here on the spot, but I hope we touch on some of them in the discussion. So, my panel here on my right is a very illustrious group. All of you will be familiar with each of them. Each of these airlines is profitable. Each of these airlines is investing in new aircraft, and each of them flies to Cyprus. That possibly is where the similarities end. We'll unpick some of those. The way we're going to run the session, we have about an hour and 15 minutes. We're going to start talking about market conditions, get your take on some of the key issues. Then, of course, we'll focus on sustainability. We'll talk about the competitive dynamics and the ever-shifting consolidation, new business models, and so on. We will try and pull that together and think about what the successful airline of the future looks like, and depending on how we go with questions from you in the audience and how time permits, we will of course take questions as well. So, I'm going to take my seat and I'm going to address my very first question to Dimitrios from Aegean. Summer 19 is underway. Yep. Aegean's home market, Greece, is...
And Cyprus.
Yes. Is very... reliant on tourism. And how are the things looking so far from your perspective, 2019?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is for sure a softer summer versus the previous 3-4 seasons. Obviously, in the past 3-4 seasons, we enjoyed in Greece, and I believe also in Cyprus, significant growth in incoming passengers and tourists. So it is expected that at some point there is going to be a plateau, which apparently it seems like that this is going to be a softer period. There will be still growth overall in Greece, but at significantly lower level compared to last year. So low single-digit growth.
Okay, thank you. Willie, pretty much everyone in the room, I expect, wants to ask you about the MAX. News from last week, so I'm going to use my position to get in there first. You signed an OU for 200 aircraft, I understand. Could you tell us a little bit about that decision and what your expectations are in terms of taking deliveries, potentially deploying the aircraft in your fleet?
Yeah, sure. I'm a long-term supporter of Boeing. We order and operate a lot of their aircraft in IAG Airlines. Significantly, some of our airlines were all Boeing up to recent times when we now have a mix of Boeing and Airbus aircraft. I think we're fortunate in the industry to have two strong major players. There are a number of other players in the industry, but two strong major players who compete well with one another, and quite honestly, both of them are producing good aircraft, and we need that competition to continue. So for some time I've been concerned that on our short-haul fleet we look like almost a captive customer for Airbus, and that's unhealthy. So for some time we have been considering the Boeing option. Indeed, back in 2012 we did consider switching some of our fleet to a Boeing option back then, but decided not to proceed because of the costs of changing the aircraft. IAG is, quite a significant airline group today. We have the capacity to operate across our network, and therefore we can afford to operate different types and even different subtypes. So fundamentally, I believe Boeing will get this right. I think when this aircraft comes back into service after the review by the regulators, it will get a full clean bill of health because the regulators are giving it a very thorough evaluation. And that's what we've said. These aircraft will go through a thorough evaluation by regulators. I'm pleased to see that it looks like the regulators are working with one another, and I think that's absolutely essential. So we signed a letter of intent for 200 737 MAX-8 and -10 to be delivered from 2023, possibly a little bit earlier in 2022, but it's 2023 to 2027. And personally, I'm looking forward to the aircraft joining our fleet. I think it's going to be a great aircraft, and I think it'll be a great addition to the aircraft that we have in our fleet today.
Thank you. And I understand you even personally gave it a bit of a test run in a simulator, is that?
Yeah, so I used to be a 737 pilot. I started many years ago flying on the 737-200 and then the 3, 4 and 500 series aircraft. So it's 20 years since I've flown the aircraft, but I asked Boeing to let me have a look at the aircraft in the simulator, both with the MAX the MCAS as it was, and then with the proposed modification to the MCAS. So I could see for myself, like I'm sure everybody in this room had read about the issue, but actually seeing it firsthand was very valuable. So I was able to fly the aircraft with the old MCAS in operation and see what happens, and then see what the new modification does. So it was very useful to be able to see it. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that I have any insight into how this aircraft will be reintroduced into service, but for me personally, it was good to be able to see the aircraft in operation, or the simulator with the MCAS in operation, and to better understand what the issues are.
Excellent. Robert, next question for you, something completely different.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to have much on the MAX. So.
Lucky. EU 261 continues to challenge airlines, and each year the airline industry spends hundreds of millions of euros compensating passengers for delays. From the figures I've seen, at least, the money spent on this compensation hasn't had any discernible impact on on-time performance. And as you might expect, it's an extremely complex issue. But I'm sure each of you have a view on this in terms of whether it's achieving the objectives that it's setting out in terms of protecting very important passenger rights, but attributing the costs fairly. In your view, how could EU 261 be improved to meet the valid policy objectives more effectively?
Yeah, no, I think if anybody's seen our statements over the last couple of years, and I think any one of my colleagues up here, you'll see we're all basically saying the same thing on this now, which is 261 has become quite a complication for all of us. I mean, I think we all agree, we get the intent of what it was trying to do, which, as you say, is protect the consumer, and it's not a question of trying to harm the consumer, but it's more a question, our average fare is somewhere between 50 and 60 pounds, and we have a 3-hour delay and we're paying out 250 pounds a person. And that's, you said it's hard to see where the impact is coming from, but if you look at some of the statistics of what's going on underneath, I mean, last year alone, we had an average delay of almost 20 minutes per flight, and that was double what it was the year before. A lot of our crews, when we're out, are saying, but we haven't had French ATC strikes, so it should be better this year. But, I mean, if you look at the delay numbers, it's still going up. We still see delays 25% worse in air traffic delays that are hitting us over the summer. So we're not seeing it get any better, and yet, our on-time performance is not eroding largely, even though we're facing more and more challenges around it. It's just our bills are going up and up and up. And I mean, it is causing us to think about things in a very different way. So coming into this summer, we made a big effort to really try and get into the schedule and think about trade-offs. We doubled the number of standby aircraft we were putting on the ground in the summer, and I know you guys have all made similar statements about standby aircraft, and Lufthansa's been in the press about it. We went through the schedule. We had to make 54,000 changes just to try and get brakes into the right spot so that when we actually try to recover, we have time in the right spot. So, I mean, it's a huge focus of what we're trying to work on, and it's been the single biggest cost driver for us the last 5 years. The challenge we see is I think at this point, we don't see a huge momentum to change it, because at this point, I think our point of view, and I mean, you guys can disagree if you want, but mostly of the cost it feels is falling to us as the airlines. If you look at it, I mean, the letters are coming to us, the compensation's paying out to us. We've had conversations with airports saying, look, we really need resilience, yet ultimately we see a lot of focus on using capacity. I mean, there was a quote up on the panel earlier about 99.5% efficiency, and I get it. The network there is set up to incentivize that. From a politician stakeholder point of view as well, again, it's not very consumer friendly to say we're going to change the regulations. So how we're going to, it was interesting with the question of how do we come together as a community to really think about this differently. I think all of us are thinking about it very differently, and we'd welcome a lot of conversations with other partners on thinking about how do we tackle this differently, because I don't think we can keep operating the way we do.
Mm-hmm. Just add, if I may, it's difficult to come together as a community because there's so many opposing interests. Yeah. I mean, there are two things that can be done to EU 261 that would improve it. One is to take that very woolly, limp paragraph which says that airlines may recover their EU 261 costs from the original, occasionally airports. I can't see agreement on that. The second way of making it more equitable and making it more acceptable to airlines, or at least to us, would be to make it, as I think Robert said, the penalty a percentage of the fare. I mean, the idea that somebody who's paid 500 euros gets a, whatever it is, 350 euro compensation, when the average fare across...
So also valid reason.
But that very point about recovering it, that might, I would certainly be pushing for.
And one comment is that, I mean, due to the 261, obviously airlines have been pressed, because at the end of the day, we are the ones that pay the compensation. We have been obviously reacting by becoming more efficient, optimizing ground times, optimizing everything possible, and we have reduced our internally controlled delays significantly, at least at AEGEAN, and I'm sure you guys have done the same. In the past 3 years, we have significantly reduced the delays that are internally controlled. Technical delays, ground delays, passenger delays, ramp delays, and so on. The delays that keep increasing in the past 3 years are the externally, they come from external factors that we have no way to influence. So we are doing our job to improve ourselves, and we would like to see also the other stakeholders that contribute to the delays also to be as efficiency driven as airlines have been.
And punished as much.
Well, yeah.
Staying with you, David, Ryanair's FY19 results were the softest for some time, but it's all relative. I think most people in the room would be very happy with your results. You remain by far the most profitable airline in Europe and have the scale to respond to the softening of the market, which many people are seeing and certainly expect. How do you, as Ryanair, view the conditions in 2019 and into 20? And which are the macro indicators that you're thinking about for the outlook?
It's a mixed bag. I mean, Brexit I think I think it's Brexit. I don't know what it is, but precisely. But the UK market is incredibly soft, and colleagues are telling me that the cargo side of things, which is a good lead indicator, suggests that that is the case. High street shop closures. I'm looking at some of our competitors, particularly on the leisure stuff, where fares are significantly down on last year. So the UK, which is a huge market, and UK to Spain and Iberia is a huge market which has the capability of distorting all results. Then you've got Germany, where Lufthansa are continuing on their mission to prevent access to Germany. You have Lufthansa, the only entity in the world, apart from a couple of politicians, saying that Tegel should close, and that Berlin should be deprived of even the capacity it has to block it out. And that's turned into a situation where at all costs, and it seems to be in the case of Q1 and Eurowings, 400 million or 350 million in loss. The way the pricing is going in the regional Greek airports, you're going to see more and more of that growth occurring in June, July and August, which is part of a larger conspiracy of hoteliers and so on in Greece who like to put people back on the dole rather than have permanent employees in the off-season. So that's another shift. But equally then, you're seeing around the periphery of Europe increasingly keen pricing from airports, successfully taking capacity that might otherwise have been put into the centre of Europe out to places. I'm not even talking about us, I'm talking about Georgia, in the case of Wizz Air, notably not Tbilisi, because they made the cardinal mistake of auctioning their concession at Tbilisi. They had to then build another airport and pay airlines to go to it, and that's Kutaisi. So there's a lot of different components to the market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, any other perspectives on
interestingly, for us, when we talk about the UK, it's principally London. So we aren't seeing any softness in the UK as we define it. And I think what David has said probably demonstrates that there is a difference across the UK, because for us, London continues to be good. When we look globally, we see weakness in places like Brazil and Argentina, which are clearly economic issues. Argentina with the devaluation. South Africa has been weak. And then within Europe, for us, the areas of weakness that we've seen or softness that we've seen has been France and Italy. Leaving Germany and Austria, which is a different issue, which I think shows that there's quite a lot of demand. But exactly as David said, it's impacted by the behavior of the Lufthansa group, who are complaining about capacity, but when you look at it, it's their capacity that's causing the problem. So they're complaining about themselves, which is not unusual. But 2018 was good. 2018 was a record year for us. 2019, we're saying that we expect our profitability in 2019 to be the same as it was in 2018. It is a bit tougher, without question, but at this point, we're not noticing any Brexit impact on our business. And we look very closely to see it. I know EasyJet did say there was some Brexit impact, and David has said there was some there. We haven't been able to identify it. That's not to say that Brexit won't. I think Brexit ultimately has to have an impact, because I don't see any potential outcome in the short to medium term for the UK economy that's positive around Brexit. And anything that's negative for the economy is generally negative for our industry.
Do you think that slight difference is attributable to the different markets which you serve, but the long-haul, short-haul distinction and the greater business emphasis? Do you think that might be what's underneath that difference?
The advantage of IAG, we've airlines operating pretty much every segment. We don't see exactly the same everywhere, but we see a lot of similarities. But having said that, Aer Lingus is having a very good French market, whereas Vueling's performance in France is weaker than they had expected. Spain, parts of Spain, very strong. Generally, I would describe Europe as being okay. There's good demand there. What we have seen is a lot of capacity, particularly in the first quarter of this year, went in, and therefore, while the demand, exceeded that capacity in some cases or met that capacity, it was at a yield hit, and therefore yields did take a hit in the first quarter. And for some, it appears that that's the case in the second quarter and third quarter. The booking patterns that we're seeing at the moment, don't show us any change in the traditional trends that we have seen. But I think 2019 will be a tougher year for most airlines. Fuel prices still stubbornly high, And for those that aren't hedged, it's going to be a major problem, particularly those airlines with very weak balance sheets and weak profitability. I think 2019 is probably going to be a critical time, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a number of airlines disappear as we head through this year and into next year.
Yep, I'm sure we'll touch on that when we get to the competitive dynamics. Staying with you, if I may, switching to the topic of the conference on sustainability, IAG, British Airways, before that has a very long history of sustainability action and communication, including investing in biofuels. Yeah. The last project that I was very interested in, living in London, was your East London waste conversion project, which then I think I read had been scrapped, citing lack of government support. Could you update us on whether that's back on or still scrapped, and also more broadly, what, in your view, governments can do to encourage investments in these potential solutions?
No, it's very much back on. And I think this is where the British government does deserve credit, because what we had argued for some time is where you have a system that is incentivizing investment in biofuel for road transport, and therefore providing the financial incentive to people to invest there, when there is a ready alternative to a liquid-based fuel for cars. Electric cars are a reality. We can talk about electric aircraft and hybrid electric aircraft, but it's clear we will be using a carbon-based fuel, a liquid fuel in aviation for some considerable time to come. We've now leveled the playing field where the British government have recognised that there's a strong case to support investment in biofuels for aviation. And we're still convinced that for us, waste to liquid is the alternative. So we're working with a new partner, Velocis. We expect to start producing a biofuel in 2022. This is a waste to liquid. It works in large urban areas because there's a lot of waste that's still going to landfill. There's a landfill tax in the UK, so you've got the financial incentive. Instead of paying to put this waste in the ground, you can actually put this waste to a facility that can turn the waste into a sustainable biofuel. So we believe it is part of the medium-term solution. It's clearly something that longer term we would hope to see overtaken by the likes of electric or hybrid electric. But until we can get to a position whereby you can have a 180-seater narrow-body aircraft flying over considerable range, it's still true that today that 80% of CO2 emissions are from aviation in excess of 1,500 kilometres. So the opportunity for electric and hybrid electric is that 20% in the short term. To get to a situation where we can have a hybrid electric aircraft flying on a regular sustainable basis beyond 1,500 kilometres, I still think we're some distance away. So we will be investing and continue to invest in biofuels. We're working now with a number of partners. What I found interesting was when we first tried to do this back in 2008, we had two parties approach us or respond to our request for proposals in 2008. 2018, there's hundreds of them. So in 10 years, it's gone from practically nobody looking at sustainable biofuels for aviation to just about everybody now recognizing that this is an area for potential investment. And we believe the technology exists and that there is a commercial model that can be implemented.
It's very encouraging, absolutely. David, Ryanair has invested billions and continues to invest billions in the latest, most efficient aircraft. You also have the highest load factors in the industry, averaging 95%, which I had to double check in the numbers to make sure that that's actually, that's unprecedented. So that does result in very, very low per passenger emissions across your network. Absolutely valid and very commendable. Do you find that is sufficient to convince your customers, policymakers of Ryanair's sustainability credentials, or do you find that's falling short?
I wouldn't group customers and policymakers in
the
same bracket. It certainly convinces our customers. We'll have 153 million of them this year, and a considerable number are now using Ryanair's carbon offset facility on our website. So I think we're one of the few. I'm not sure if any of the other airlines yet have a carbon offset payment. You do, but so they can, if they want, they can salve their conscience and address their shame, and we will then be able to. We will shortly be making it specific to each route, so they can absolutely make each flight carbon neutral. But in terms of regulators, come on, like this is the most monstrous example of virtue signaling, which is a new word I learned in the last few years, in the last decade. Like the biggest abuse of the environment at the moment is the abuse of the environmental argument by politicians. You take Norway, which relies on, I think, oil for about 40% of its income. And I met the finance minister while discussing the so-called environmental tax in aviation and suggested that they stop pumping oil. That didn't really work. And then you take the Netherlands with Schiphol Airport, where they're about to introduce a €10 tax per passenger, which will be a very significant percentage of low-cost airline fares, but they're going to exclude the 26 million out of 60 million passengers who are transit passengers through Amsterdam. So they will incentivize individuals to take off and land in Amsterdam, but discourage them from actually visiting the city. So just land and take off. You're exempted from the tax, but we'll tax everybody else. So, like, the abuse is actually the abuse of the issue. What Ryanair is doing, and other airlines are doing, why? What we're doing is to try to reduce our carbon emissions. Why? Because we're paying for it. Nobody else pays for it except us. We have the biggest vested interest in this issue. Meanwhile, everybody else sees it as an opportunity for more money. You take I think it's Budapest Airport, I don't know if you're here, I think it was imposed in Budapest that they must now charge for flights during the night. I wonder where the money's going. You know, it's just another racket. So no, we're not going to convince the regulators. I think the fact that all across Europe, the vested interests, and I'm thinking largely Lufthansa, Air France actually, are driving the argument towards nobody should fly short haul in Europe. It should all be trains which, as we know, run on fairy dust. They don't require fuel or concrete or anything. They should take trains to Frankfurt, Munich, Amsterdam and Paris. And the island people, well, the island people are just the island people, like the Irish and the Greeks, and we know what they think of them. And if you need to get to... I think it's a load of nonsense. Yeah. Not the environmental issue, which Ryanair takes very seriously. We emit 67 grams of CO2 per passenger kilometre, which is what? Close to half of Lufthansa's 120 grams per km. That's real. But it will take some time for politicians to understand it if they want to, which they don't.
I mean, I think just building on that for a second, I mean, it's interesting when we're seeing exactly as David said. I mean, as we're seeing a lot of the policy come across right now, most of the discussion is on punitive measures, taxes, fees, elimination of certain types of travel, etc., all focused on, specifically areas that probably we excel in. If you think about short-haul travel, where we actually, I mean, if you look back over time, I would challenge anybody in the room to come back with where a tax we've put on the industry has actually spurned innovation, and I can't think of anyone. And so, really, what I think it's going to take is how are we actually going to figure out and invest if it's biofuels, if it's electric airplanes. I mean, I think there are going to have to be some stands. We're going to have, again, I think back to your, I was excited to hear in the panel earlier the discussion around doing this together as a community. I mean, I think we'd all be for that. To be clear, I think we have to figure out how exactly that gets paid for, because, again, if it comes back to we just pay more, that causes travelers to go down, and nobody wins in that equation. So how are we going to push this industry forward and invest in that new technology we need is a real question. I think there was the idea of locking a bunch of people in the room. Maybe that's the question to really put to them to figure out.
If I may add one thing to that, I thought there were several really interesting components to Philip Cornelis's presentation, where he described lower fares as a tribute, a progress whereby luxury has moved to service. But it seems to me that generally the policies seem to lead towards let's protect the luxury and attack the service, i.e. the lower fares. So if there is going to be a tax, or a new tax, a pan-European tax, it must be a percentage of the fare. If you take the actress Emma Thompson, whom I presume many of you will have heard, I hadn't heard of her much, but apparently she's famous. She flew all the way from LA business class to protest at London about something to do with the environment. Under current plans, she might be taxed €10 on her €5,000 fare. No, it should be a percentage, because if you're going to pay more, you're probably enjoying a greater luxury. You're probably taking up more space in a half-full aircraft, and you should be paying more. So we would argue if there's going to be a tax, a new one, it should be a tax on the fare, because that's an incentive to get higher density. The second element we would argue for, our second point we'd make, is that there is already a tax. Ryanair pays over €500 million in airport passenger duties, which in their origination had the word environment in them, including UK APD, German APD, and so on. So there's a fallacy out there that airlines somehow don't pay taxes. We've been screwed.
A question has come in from the audience that relates to this topic, so I'll share it now. And you already touched at this from an investment angle. Who's going to pay for this joined-up thinking? The question is, don't you think airlines and airports should better jointly communicate all of the environmental? So already, as I highlighted, quite a lot is actually going on, and good progress is being made. The Air Transport Action Group is active, but as far as consumers and arguably policymakers are concerned, some of the positive messages are not getting through, and that's why the other side is being so effective. Any thoughts on the sort of the potential to collaborate in the communication? I
think we've got to do a much better job in terms of communication. I think we've got to be honest about it, and I think that's part of the problem. I think we started from a position, and maybe I got back 10, 15 years ago when the focus started really coming on the industry from an environmental point of view. And I think we were overly dismissive, saying, we're only 2%, so, ignore us and go look for somebody else. I think that was a mistake, and I think we do need to up our game in terms of our communications. And quite honestly, we do have a good story to tell, and we better start telling it well. From an industry point of view, I always struggle with this idea that we're in the same industry. I don't think we are. The airline industry is very different to the airport industry. We're labelled under aviation, but we've got different priorities, different challenges, different opportunities, and trying to collaborate is always a challenge. But I think in the area of environment, there is more that we can do. Yeah. And I think this is an area where the industry does have to get together, because what people, in my experience, love, particularly regulators and politicians, they love to see disagreement from within an industry, and therefore they're going to widen the definition of our industry to ensure that there are plenty of people who will disagree, and we're seen as fighting amongst ourselves, and that's not good. I think, at IATA, there's a lot of very good work has been done. Not every airline is a member of IATA. IATA is 240 airlines. I think there's about 1,000 airlines in the world. So it represents a very high percentage of the number of passengers flying, but it doesn't represent everybody. With A4E, I think we're doing a lot of good work working together on specific issues, and I've no doubt that A4E will turn its attention to environment, and there you will see better communication. So when you get the likes of Ryanair, EasyJet, IAG, Lufthansa, Air France, and others saying the same thing consistently on these issues, I think the message does start getting through. But without question, we do have to do a better job in terms of communication.
I mean, I agree completely. I mean, I think we have to, there is going to be a little bit of how do we find those common points we want to communicate, because I think, you highlighted earlier, Willie, that I would say Lufthansa and Air France, just to call out two, are not always on the same page with us in terms of the main points we want to communicate. But there is a lot of overlap. I mean, we had a discussion last month with Vinci about how can we start working together. I don't know where Nicolas went, but yeah, we had a discussion last month where you're largest customer now, and there's a lot we can do together, and a lot of common interests of what we want to achieve. So I do think there's a lot of overlap on this subject that we can build on.
Dimitrios, still on the topic of sustainability, but in the broader sense, we touched on this earlier, but it is important to remember that most people, most experts in the field, remind us that sustainability has 4 pillars. There's economic sustainability, there's environmental sustainability, social and human sustainability. And the focus at the moment has been very much on the environmental sustainability. For an airline such as Aegean, serving the markets which you do, I suspect that the view is perhaps a little bit different. Where do you view this current focus on
the environmental issue? We feel the same pressure because whatever tax is being applied, we pay it, whether it's being the APD in the UK or the similar thing in Germany, or whether it will be a EU-wide tax. So we are very much interested in what happens there. And we do our fair share, being a small airline, in terms of optimizing our processes and so on regarding the environmental issues and emissions. Now, on the other issues, obviously, social responsibility for us in our home market is very important, especially given the 10 years of disastrous crisis that Greece has gone through. And people's responsibility towards our people, and this we have been taking in Aegean extremely seriously, both social responsibility towards the communities that we are flying in Greece, and towards our people. So I believe those are, for me, the environmental issue has become very top in the agenda in the past 2 years, all of a sudden. But the social and people's responsibility should remain, and it is very high on the agenda. For us, it has been top in the agenda since we have been around in this business for the past 20 years, and it remains high on the agenda. I mean, we do grow a lot our people, we do develop the skills of our people, we invest a lot on our people. We do a lot of stuff in helping the communities that we are based, or we fly, even seasonally during the summer. And I think most airlines do, one way or the other. Obviously, an IAG, given its global reach, it has to make its choices how they do it. And obviously, different airlines have different ways on how they manage their responsibility towards people. I mean, because this reflects the culture of the airline, the legacy things that an airline carries with it. I mean, being a young airline like us, for being around only for 20 years, it's easier to foster our own culture versus having a legacy system that AIG carries with it. So, but I think it's too much talk about the environment, and the other two pillars of sustainability, they're a little bit out of the picture, and that's not good, even long term for the airlines.
Before I move on to the competitive dynamics, did any of you have any other thoughts or reactions on that broader sustainability point?
I think it can be connected to the previous point about communication. I think the public aren't really interested in dry arguments, 2% or 3%. Yeah. I think one of the interesting things I've seen across a lot of businesses now is commentary on the purpose of a business. So you've got obviously your business objectives, your shareholders' targets, and so on. But what can actually be communicated is, and I have to say we don't do it particularly well, is the purpose of the business. Connecting people all across Europe. A positive counterforce to this closing of national borders and so on. And I think that's a hugely important message that we can all put out together without arguing, to be honest. And I think that's where it connects on the people's sustainability side.
I'm encouraged as well. There was the Department for Transport in the UK does what's known as a public attitudes survey, and they present statistics. They presented one recently which really surprised me. So they asked this question, and you need to listen to the question. The question says, people should be able to travel by plane as much as they like, even if this harms the environment. So people should be able to travel by plane as much as they like, even if this harms the environment. They've been asking this question for many years. Now, the results probably won't surprise you in that in 2019, 24% of people agreed with that. 24% of people surveyed said, yes, people should be allowed to fly as much as they like, even if it harms the environment. And 39% disagreed. What surprised me was, in 2005, 16% of people agreed with it, and 45% of people disagreed. Now, to me, that's the surprise, that since 2005, actually more people agree with that statement, which goes against the grain, given the general focus that people have had on the environment. So there's something there. I don't necessarily agree with the statement that you can do whatever you like, even if it harms the environment. I'm surprised that the number of people that have agreed with that is as high as it is. But I think people have a realization that aviation is a force for good. Let's be honest. More good has come to Europe as a result of the opening deregulation of the market and the development of low-cost travel, and how that has facilitated people traveling and understanding, Europe and their friends and their colleagues better. So I think there's a balance to be achieved here, and we have a story to tell. I think the story that we can tell is actually quite positive. But we do need to get out there and start getting our messages across in a much more consistent and coherent way, and be honest about the fact that, yes, we do have an environmental impact, but look at what we're trying to do to minimize and mitigate the impact that we have, and what it is we will do in the future to ensure that we will play our part.
Absolutely. So then shifting gears a little bit to think about the competitive dynamics in the airline space. Starting with Ryanair, you have acquired Lauda Motion, now called Lauda, I think, in the Austrian market, with plans to operate, I think, 25 aircraft this year and up to 30 by next year. Next year we'll also see the launch of Malta Air, with 8 aircraft, which I understand are being moved from the parent airline to the new operation. This is in addition to Ryanair Sun, which has been operating from the Polish market as well as the main airline. This seems to be a bit of a departure. Are you building up to be an IAG?
We've been long been admirers of Willie.
Is this an IAG stealth move?
Long been admirers of Willie. Hang on his every word.
What's driving this trend, and how what are the benefits that you're expecting from this slightly different approach to growing your portfolio?
The airlines will compete, first of all. We're now so big that we need to compete with ourselves, and I don't mean on routes necessarily. I don't want one airline with a €9 fare and another airline with a €7 fare, but they will compete in terms of their efficiency and their productivity. And the dynamism of their local management, which will be lean. I mean, several of the functions will remain probably within the main Ryanair airline. Some legal, etc., will move to So that's the reason, primarily, to split it up and have individual management trying to be more productive. Because in our business, at the end of the day, it is going to be the most reliable and lowest cost that wins. And we have to... since no one else can compete with us, we have to compete with ourselves.
Oh. It's tough. You can probably guess what my follow-on question is then looking ahead. Willie already mentioned that he expects some airlines to exit the market. Yeah. If you just look at the structural differences between market concentration in the US versus Europe, broadly comparable market sizes, a very different structure. Where do you see the consolidation coming from? Is it through more M&A, or is it exit, or a bit of both?
Is that directed at Willie?
I think you start
to be honest, I have no insights into the long haul element or the global stuff. I think it's inevitable that several smaller airlines are going to disappear over the next 6 months, and have already. And maybe 1 or 2 sizable ones. But it's not for me to name names around here. I'm not going to do that. Everyone knows, all those airports out there who are looking for an insurance policy are already talking to me, so I think everyone knows.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a combination. I think there will be some M&A activity, but I think when we talk about consolidation in Europe, we do talk about it in the context of airlines disappearing as well. And unlike 20 years ago, I think when an airline disappears, it's rare to see that airline replaced. It's not always the case, but a lot of the capacity is now provided by airlines already in operation, which leaves very little space for anybody to try and come in and start up. So you're getting consolidation through failures, and you're getting consolidation through M&A, and I suspect that's what will happen this year. But this year, I think it's going to be more around airlines that will disappear, and the efficient airlines will provide the capacity that's required. And we've seen that. We've seen that over the last 10, 15 years, where a number of airlines have disappeared. Consumers are not abandoned. I think that was the fear, and that's why you had state-owned airlines, which is ridiculous, to be honest, in this day and age, that, you had to have an airline or your people would be completely isolated. If there's a market, there are plenty of airlines out there who can efficiently serve that market and have demonstrated that they're prepared to do so, and consumers have not been the ones who have lost out as a result of the consolidation that has taken place in Europe. If anything, the industry is more competitive today than it was 10 years ago, and will be more competitive 5 years from now than it is today. Yeah. So, I think people who fear from a consumer point of view that consolidation is bad, I think the evidence strongly points in the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think... go ahead, David.
Well, just to speak positively, since I spoke critically of the Budapest night noise levy, which I understand is government-imposed. I just want to know where the money is going. You look at what happened when Malev disappeared.
Yeah.
That's a classic example.
Overnight.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. If you want to get your money answered question, you got to put it in through the question tracker, then you can get it answered. No, I think on Consolidated, it's interesting. I'd say the one thing we haven't seen yet, and it'll be interesting to see, I think, with the next wave of consolidation, is you haven't really seen the capacity come out. I mean, there was allusion earlier to what's going on in Germany is a great case. I mean, we're both being a bit deemed as the evil people bringing in more capacity. If you look at it, our capacity we've put, I think, across the two of us combined into the Berlin market is still less than Air Berlin had. It's our large legacy carrier who's racing in to fill in all the positions that were there and keeping capacity higher than it probably should be in the market. And that's where I think if you look at especially what's happened in the US and where it's created a more sustainable model over time, is you haven't seen that rush to necessarily backfill all the capacity that's come out. And that's where I think there's still a little bit of let's call it improvement still to go in Europe.
Staying with you, since you have the floor a bit, one of the topics that I've been following with interest is the virtual interlining, the self-connections. You launched EasyJet worldwide late last year? Maybe it's been longer than that.
It was right when I joined, so about a year and a half ago.
So, which is the ability for your passengers to book connecting flights through the EasyJet platform. I wasn't surprised to see that at your largest base in Gatwick, there is at the start of EasyJet worldwide and the turning on of lower fare classes on Norwegian, connecting some short haul and long haul, resulted in a 10-fold increase in self-connections at that airport. Still from a small base, still very much a niche. How are you finding the customer response from an EasyJet perspective to this new addition, which historically for an LCC exclusively point-to-point was always a no-no?
Yeah, no, it's been a journey for us. I mean, we launched it about a year and a half ago, and we talked about it for a while, and there was a lot of discussion of should we go towards a real traditional product and really try to get that up, and we decided no, that was probably not the right approach for us. Something much more kind of learn as you go we felt was the right thing. So we started off, launched it in with Norwegian into Gatwick and a few others, and it's growing. And we're now at about 12 airlines I think we have live in 27 airports around Europe. So it's grown quite a bit. It's now, I mean, we don't talk about the numbers, but I can say that it's large enough that the CFO actually notices it now. So it's on the radar. And I think the customer response has actually been fairly positive. I mean, it's not... we let's be clear, if you look at the connection times we've got in there, it's still got a 2.5-hour minimum connect. In most of the airports, you're carrying your own bag between the service. So we're not going to get the business class passenger that was flying on BA connecting over Heathrow to come to us. But in especially cost conscious, late booking customers, it's coming in with a competitive alternative that's creating some interesting, unique flows that you couldn't otherwise serve. And so it's actually creating almost a new bit of segment for us and building out something new. So we're very happy with it and looking to continue to improve it.
So Willie shouldn't be unduly concerned just yet about his premium hub.
No, but you got to realize customers have been doing this forever.
Yeah.
So if I look back, Aer Lingus and JetBlue have in effect been working together for probably 15 years when we realized that people were flying into New York with Aer Lingus and then connecting themselves onto JetBlue. So the question then becomes, can you do it for them in a way that's efficient for you and convenient for the customer? And what we've discovered is that there are people who are prepared and want to do that and are prepared to actually pay, whereas the traditional model was it was at a discount. You connect at a discount to the combined fares. Yeah. Now the model is actually you pay the combination of the fares plus a fee to facilitate the connection. So I can assure you there's nothing to fear in that model. That's an opportunity for us. So when we look at this, we've done connecting between low cost to low cost internally within IAG. We've had a lot of discussions with Ryanair, between Ryanair and Aer Lingus, about doing it at Dublin airports, and we've been very clear. We've no hesitation in saying we will work with Ryanair, and Ryanair have said the same. We'll work if we can make it work. But what we don't want to do is, undermine the commercial strength of our model by doing something that introduces complexity and cost where there's no benefit to the consumer. Yeah. So, we'll do it where the consumer wants us to do it, and we'll do it where we can do that for the consumer without, adding cost or complexity to the business.
May I add to it, though? I think, if we're just to wheel it back conveniently to the environment, I mean, it's hugely ironic that airport discounts are given to transfer passengers and tax exemptions are given to transfer passengers, whereby passengers are being enticed to making 2 flights for one journey. I mean, when I listen to it, and I know I've taken it away from the point, but you've spoken on our behalf in a way there, Willie. When I listen to what Philip said about utilising spare airport capacity in Europe, there's a lot of spare airport capacity in Europe. If I look at southern Italy, the number of runways in southern Italy adjacent to the most wonderful of scenery, the finest of food and so on, and they can't attract customers because no one in Europe really wants to take 2 flights to get from, northern Europe to southern Italy. They don't want that to happen. And now it comes back to taxes, because these airports are quite capable, through their hard endeavours and so on, to deliver an airport cost well below €10, to be able to work in that equation with us to deliver fare that will bring people directly to that region. But when the government introduces a €6.50 tax, which may well be close to double 100% of the cost, it ruins it. So again, there's a lot of, I suppose, hypocrisy within the political classes on this subject. But having said that, we're willing to embrace hypocrisy if it suits us, and and work with Aer Lingus on connections at Dublin. But at the moment, we haven't found a solution.
I did also read that you were looking at some sort of connecting proposition at Stansted. Is that active in any real sense, or is it a...
No, I mean, there isn't much by way of long haul in Stansted at the moment. We're full. But as Willie says, there needs to be a good commercial reason to do it. I mean, one commercial reason to do it in other airports is they seem to give away fantastic discounts for using the transfer facility. Where that presents itself, we might be interested in it. But in Stansted, we will maintain an open mind. If the right partner comes along and we can make it work technologically. And the difficulty is, I think, the technology for the connections that we're talking about is not perfect. No, it doesn't help with the bags. And you're forced into legacy technology, whereby the owner of this fully depreciated software is charging you almost half your airfare for the privilege of using an ancient system. So that needs to change too. And I think airports have a role in that, not through the Gatwick type solution, but certainly in the baggage processing systems and how they interface with the likes of Navitaire, etc.
I mean, I think just to build on that, because I mean, I know the only thing I think that, again, I think doing it together with airports in the right way is important. I know, because I think you guys have had a discussion, there are some solutions out there, such as like Kiwi, et cetera, that we actually see working against the consumer and creating problems. They're essentially falsely advertising to our consumers around the products they're buying, the service they're going to get, and even doing some slightly underhanded techniques in terms of how they're interacting with us. And that's where I think it's just important that we work. That's another great example of working together is better. If working with a partner that's kind of doing some underhanded techniques doesn't help.
That's a polite way of putting it. Dimitrios, Aegean has a different model. You've been a member of Star Alliance since 2010, thereabouts. And you also have an ever-increasing proportion of connecting passengers over your hub in Athens. I guess question one, are the two related? And question two, how significant do you consider your alliance membership to the continued growth over your hub in Athens?
No, the connectivity by Athens is not related to Star Alliance. It's a result of the development of our own network outside Greece, both towards West and North Europe and to the southeast of Greece, at least to the places that we can fly. Because, for example, we started Tehran and we had to stop it for the well-known reasons. So it is not related to Star Alliance. Now, on the Star Alliance benefit, yes, there is a benefit for a company like us, which is a very, operating in a very isolated area of Europe, based in Greece, not specific, not the most healthy and wealthy place. So we get access to passengers through Star Alliance from long-haul flights that otherwise we wouldn't have access to. So we get an incremental number of passengers that it's a small number, but it's still a contribution. Plus, it increases awareness about Aegean, which is very low, obviously, outside Greece and Europe. So this is the main benefit of Star Alliance. Plus, on the loyalty side, the connection of our frequent flyer program with the frequent flyer programs of the other 27 members of Star Alliance, that also brings in good connectivity, for example, on London, via Paris, Frankfurt, Munich. So these are all incremental flows of passengers for us that otherwise they would probably choose, they would have the option to choose an alternative, and now, because they want to accrue miles, they decide to fly with us.
And what are your views on David's point earlier about the relative inefficiency and relative unattractiveness of having to connect? So given a choice, if somebody comes in and joins A to C, how much of a threat is that to your network and the model you've built over Athens?
I mean, again, I know David's position on that, and we have discussed it many times. So obviously, being in Greece, they're not only the airports that David and Robert are flying. They fly, I think, to 12 or 14 airports in Greece, and we have 36 of them. So there is a need for passengers to reach other destinations once they reach Athens. And obviously, being an airline based in Greece, we have to offer this service. So on the other hand, as David said, it's also a matter of price. If you see consumers, they choose a cheaper flight, a cheaper alternative. They decide to have a layover of 2.5 hours in Gatwick instead of buying a more expensive point-to-point flight, because it is cheaper and this is how they want to fly. There are students for whom time does not matter. Therefore, they have an option.
Most of the connectivity that we look at is short haul to long haul. Very, very little. And that's not, if you go back 20 years ago, it was a lot of short haul to short haul connectivity. In Europe, that's rare. I wouldn't say it's completely zero, but it's very unusual to see it. And if somebody's connecting short haul to short haul, they're either, nothing else to do with their life, or, it really is trying to connect A to Z, and it's the only possible way. Short haul to long haul will exist for some time, but more and more, we're investing in point-to-point long-haul travel, where we think there's an efficient model, particularly a low-cost model that will be able to connect more and more cities together. You can only do it if your cost base is low. So the industry's changing all the time, and I suspect major hub airports that have traditionally depended on a short haul to short haul as well as short haul to long haul, that business model is seriously undermined. Short haul to long haul, I think, is still going to be a feature of our business for some time to come. But more and more, you're going to see point-to-point opportunities being made available as more and more airports open up for long-haul flying, and more efficient aircraft become available for long-haul flying.
Absolutely. I actually wanted to ask you about that. So thank you for bringing that up as the only long-haul operator on the panel. A couple of, I think, relevant topics you've already touched on. You have divested your small shareholding in Norwegian, but you are building up the Level brand quite rapidly. Can you give us your views on the prospects and the potential for the long-haul, low-cost model for Europe, and where you see that going?
Yeah, well, the way we see it is there is a segment of the market that is not served or underserved, which is a price-sensitive market who wants to travel long-haul. You can see what happens when you provide short-haul price-sensitive opportunities. People, you stimulate market demand, and the same applies for long-haul. But to be successful at it, you've got to have a cost base that's efficient. And our interest in Norwegian stemmed from the fact that I think they proved the business model exists, that the consumer will unbundle the product, which was always a question we had. Would people, travel that way on long haul? There was always this suggestion that 3 hours was the limit, then it was 4 hours, then it was 5 hours. Now it's as long as you want, to be honest with you. And I think Norwegian has proven that to be the case. What they haven't been able to prove is that they've got a cost base that can make that financially successful. And clearly their financial performance has been poor and shows no sign of improving with the direction the business was going in. So we believe there is a segment that can be served profitably. The key is to have a low cost base, and it's the reason we focused initially on the high density A330-200 because the ownership cost has a significant advantage over the 787. We're clear that there are cities around Europe that are underserved from a long-haul point of view, where demand exists and demand can be stimulated. But you can only stimulate it if the price is right, and to make money out of it, you're going to have a cost base that facilitates that. As we go forward, you're going to see more and more narrow-body long-haul aircraft, so the 321LR, the 321XLR. They are more efficient for long-haul markets in terms of their range and flexibility than the Boeing option at this stage. So you've got a combination of opportunities now with both single-aisle, I'd call it more medium-haul than long-haul, up to 9 hours, I think, with the LR and the XLR, and then high-density, wide-body flying. And it's going to change things, going forward. We'll be able to open up direct services from more cities, particularly around Europe, to East Coast USA, maybe the Mid-East USA, and then it opens up Africa and Middle East, not so much into Asia at this stage, but certainly Africa and US, North and South becomes very much an opportunity for us.
Yeah, absolutely. The take-up of the orders already on the 321 LRs and the XLRs just announced. So it does signal that there's likely to be deployment on the transatlantic, opening up those.
We've got 8 321 LRs. The first one comes into service. Will fly Dublin to Hartford in August of this year. We're disappointed the aircraft is delayed. It's a problem that we have with Airbus at the moment. The delays from Airbus are impacting on our network and our schedule. But that's the start of what will be a transatlantic expansion with Aer Lingus using the single-aisle 321. We've done it in the past with the 757, yes. But the 321 LR and 321 XLR in particular is much more efficient. You've got seat costs on this aircraft that are the same as on the wide-body aircraft, and that's a game changer. So for us, we will continue to look to expand the long-haul network more on a point-to-point. And with narrow-body, single-aisle transatlantic aircraft, you don't need feed. For wide-body aircraft, you still need feed today. The market isn't big enough for a lot of cities to be able to fill that aircraft on a point-to-point basis. And that's why, narrow-body, short-haul into long-haul feed will continue to be a feature of the industry for some time. But it will change. And I've no doubt if there's a panel sitting here in 15 years' time, it'll be a very different look to the industry than it is today.
Great, thank you. So far, I've only had one question from the audience. So either all of your questions are being answered, which is great, or this doesn't work. Could you please submit some questions if you have some, just so I can see, and all polite, please. Or not polite. David will take them all. So what we're going to try and do is weave together some of these discussions about what's going on in the market, where we see the near-term and mid-term, what's going on in the competitive dynamics, and sustainability in all of its forms. So the question put to us by the organisers, I think it's quite an interesting one, is to look ahead, say 5 years, which for airports is not a long time, but certainly in the airline world a lot can change in 5 years. But let's say in 5 years, what might a successful airline look like? What does it take to be a successful airline? And that's a bit of a broad question, so we'll try and break it into what is an airline. Not too philosophical a question, but we'll try and break it into some of the building blocks. And I would welcome your thoughts, and I expect there'll be some agreement on some of the areas and complete disagreement on the others. The way I thought to structure it is we'd start with the customer proposition, because that's really where it all starts. What are your views to be a successful airline in 5 years' time? What should the customer proposition be? Who wants to start with that?
Well, let me start, because I don't think people will disagree. First and foremost, it's about price. It doesn't matter which cabin the customer is sitting in, price is important. It is still the most relevant factor. It's not the only factor, but all of the research we do shows that price for every customer who flies is an important factor, and therefore we've got to be able to provide products, and it'll be a range of products. Certainly in our case it will be at a price that people are prepared to pay. And then there are other important issues for customers depending on their needs. But first and foremost, taking the obvious for given, which is that we operate safe and efficiently, which we actually invest a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort. But that's a sort of given in the minds of the customer. They don't expect to fly with somebody that's unsafe, but what they do expect is to get value for money. Mm-hmm. And then in some segments of the market, that is the most overriding factor that they have. In other segments, it's the most important, but there are other important factors that come into play as well.
Any additions to that, or all in agreement that
I can't
price
disagree.
has to...
It is price.
Yeah.
I mean, the history of the last... Once deregulation occurred, once European open skies occurred, the evidence is that it's price. And then you could throw into the mix convenience and choice, and under the convenience heading, it's convenience of booking. So an airline that requires you to go to a travel agent these days exclusively to make a booking is not going to be the favourite airline. The airline that no longer allows you to... doesn't allow you to check in on your phone is inconvenient. An airline that flies to an airport 150 kilometers away is inconvenient unless the price is good. The price is fantastic.
Not naming any names.
We fly direct to all of the airports that we fly to.
Direct to the airport, 150 kilometers away, but it's direct.
So, price, convenience, and then choice, because if they're going to come to your shop to buy, they would like to have some confidence that what they're looking for is in the shop. So I would say price, convenience, choice, and you can split that out in many ways.
And this is the critical message to airports. I think there is a problem where people believe that price isn't important, and people will be prepared to pay a few more euros. It's not the case. We don't see it that way, and that's why we have, as an airline, and indeed through AEA, such a fixation on airport charges, because every aspect of our cost base has to be justified, and we cannot accept a situation where charges just increase, because we don't have that luxury. We have the luxury of having to fight hard to get our customers, and where price is important, we have to have a cost base that makes sense to be able to succeed. And there are lots of airlines out there who won't succeed because they're paying too much money for the cost base that they have, and they're going to go out of business. And what's driving consolidation in our industry? It's airlines that are inefficient, and those airlines fortunately, are not going to be around for much longer. So, we have to have an efficient cost base. That means every aspect of our cost base comes under scrutiny. Every single penny we pay gets examined, and we're going to continue to do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just building. I mean, I think that's you started from the price angle, and absolutely, I can't disagree with that one. It all comes down underneath it, though. You got to have the cost to be able to deliver those prices. I mean, I think the other element that I'd add on that I think will change in the next 5 years is just as a industry, and by industry I mean broadly in the aviation sector, probably how we are using data to get even more exact on what we can do in every element of the operation, from the cost base to how we deliver to customers, to what they want, to the experience that they want, and then as well how we can leverage on especially digital platforms to deliver to our customers, which I think if I were to envision more and more, and yet I think all of us are headed in the same direction anyways on this, is more and more that's going to be the vessel to deliver to the customer the end product they want in a way that doesn't add additional cost and complexity into our operation. And that's going to be part of the key of how we can get the ultimate end customer proposition they want at the right price.
What about brand? What do you think the successful airline of the future? What's your views on brand? And that touches on all sorts of things around loyalty, around alliances, around the power of a brand, or at the other extreme, complete airline agnostic customers. What are your views on that? How important will an airline brand be in 5 years' time?
Well, I'm always interested to see some magazine's list of the top brands of airlines, and then to guess how many of them will be in existence in 5 years' time, because quite a few of the top brands don't exist. Look, in our part of the market, it's a commodity, but I think the market is moving on because you can get commodities with much more convenience and at lower prices and wider choices. So we have to keep improving the price, the convenience, and the choice. I don't think the brand in the Pepsi-Cola type sense is the most important thing, but we don't have much experience of developing brands, to be honest. So I'd hand that over to more brand-aware people.
I'm not a brand person, but I also believe, well, having to compete with these two guys in every route we fly, we have no other option but to be extremely efficient, because we compete on price with Ryanair to the left and EasyJet to the right. However, I also believe, as Robert said, that the customer experience element still plays a role, and it will play a role. Yes, there's going to be technology, and we all have to have very nice mobile apps that check-in is done properly, and we deliver everything to the passengers and so on. But the customer experience through the airport, on the flight, when it goes off and probably his baggage is delayed, it does have an element that affects the perception of the passenger about the airline that they flew with. So price, cost efficiency, it's a must, and because it reflects to the price that you can offer. Customer experience will remain an element in a different form through the changes of technology. But brand, I also believe that it's not going to be the decisive factor for making a choice.
Well, brands are important, and I'm not a brand person. In fact, it's quite the opposite. But the research we do shows that the brand is important. Ryanair is, a phenomenal brand, and people will recognise that. And without question, people will go to Ryanair.com because they know the Ryanair brand. You have to have brands that are relevant, but that means you have to be clear in terms of what the brand stands for and what the brand offers, and you have to be very clear that you're going to deliver to what that brand promises in a consistent way to your customers. And that's why we created IAG to be able to compete in multiple segments of the industry with multiple brands, because we quite clearly recognise that BA can't compete in every segment of the market with the British Airways brand, because it would take away from the brand if it did. And when we looked at creating IAG, we recognise, for example, 8% of BA's capacity is in Latin America, whereas 51% of Iberia's capacity is in Latin America. So the Iberia brand is really well recognised in Latin America. The BA brand was relatively unknown. You turn that on its head in North America, where in North America it's known as British. It's not even British Airways or BA, it's British. So the brand does have value. The question is, how valuable are those brands going to be 20 years from now? And I remember my former CFO at Aer Lingus when I was running Aer Lingus, Brian Dunn, who probably had less interest in brands than I did, when people were talking about the brands. And he said, I'll show you the value of the brand. And he held up the fact that we were losing money. And he says, the brand has no value if you're losing money. So the brand is only relevant if you can have a financially sustainable business. And then you've got to be relevant with your consumers with that brand. But it's changing. And, I won't say reluctantly, because I've come round to accept that, brands still do play a part today, but that may not be the case in 20 years' time.
Look, just take a slightly, because everybody has said they're not a brand person. I'm not really a brand person either, but I'll take the brand stand, which is, look, we do.
Well, you're the only. And I thought you were marketing there as well.
Yeah, so, I got it. I believe EasyJet is a good brand. No, we see a lot of value of the brand, and we do have, we do see recognition in the customers around the brand. I think the piece, it's funny, Willie, and I think I don't remember which investor. It was one of quarter ago. You had a page in there that showed all the brands of the IAG group and how it was matching up against segments. And you had Norwegian, us, Ryanair. You had all kind of how you compete against each of us. I think the challenge will be a successful airline in 5 years, back to the earlier point. If you want to go to that complexity, and I think we probably have different views on the value of different brands and the complexity that drives. If you're going to have that complexity, and I know that's what you're trying to do, is how do you manage the cost and not let that creep in with the complexity if that's what you feel you need to go after the segments. I think we have a slightly different view that says, look, our brand spans across a pretty wide segment of what we're trying to capture, and there's a lot of opportunity, and it's resonating well with a lot of the customers we want to carry, so we don't see the need to add that complexity, but it's a trade-off that I think the airlines will have to debate. The key is, how do you do it without adding cost?
I'll just pick out fleet, because we're running short on time. Fleet potentially tied to also network. Any thoughts about aircraft types, fleet size, the type of network that it will take to succeed in 5 years? What are your views on that? I know that will be of interest to airports, who will be trying to think what kind of capacity they need to provide and what kind of network development they might expect.
There's going to be more point-to-point long haul, without question. That's going to be a feature of the next 5, 10, 15 years, without question. That's certainly something that we believe will develop, particularly with single-aisle, efficient long-haul or medium-haul aircraft. So the network, I think, around Europe will see more European cities connected to traditionally long-haul destinations than we've seen before.
May I ask a question, Willie? What do you think that will do to the mega hubs of Europe at the moment?
Well, for some of the hubs, I think it's going to definitely undermine their value. Heathrow, not because the connecting traffic at Heathrow is about 35-40% of the traffic, and it's principally short haul to long haul. But a lot of the traditional European hubs, there's more short haul to short haul, which is, as I said, it should be rapidly declining, if not disappearing. And ultimately, hub airports that depend on high volume transfer traffic will see those markets, undermined when you get more cities being served directly with efficient aircraft.
Yeah, and maybe aggressive for 5 years, but I'll throw in, somewhere in that timeline, we would at least say, back to sustainability, electric aircraft coming in the fleet. So,
how many years?
Yes.
How big?
I said not the 5-year mark.
Have you a letter of intent out on that one?
Yeah, we're saying 2029. So
recharging points.
Exactly. We're going to have to. We're
working. Stands. We won't be allowed to park our A320s on the stand because
instead of slots, we're going to be fighting over who gets the charging point at the airport, just like when you drive your car in.
So there you go, another piece of infrastructure.
And of course, the electricity comes from fairy dust also. Let's not forget that as well.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. Yes. I have received a whole load of questions. Unfortunately, they appear to be for the previous panel. So unless you would like to answer questions addressed to Nicola.
Do our answers get to be applied to the airports as well?
Exactly. So time is up also. I won't even try and sum up. I think that's been extremely informative and covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much for engaging so thoughtfully with the broad range of topics. And I think it is now time for another refreshment break. So round of applause for my panelists and refreshments.
So, ladies and gentlemen, indeed very insightful panel, the perspective of the airlines. Now, immediately after the coffee break, we have the Airport Cardboard Accreditation 10th anniversary ceremony. So, pay some attention when you go to coffee break, because there are some special cupcakes, courtesy of ACI Europe, to celebrate this accreditation 10th year anniversary. So we'll be keeping the coffee break for 30 minutes. So we're convening back at 3:45. You will hear the bell also. So please, once you hear the bell, come back. Thank you, Kata.